Yeah.
Okay. And he joins us right now with the Kings pick number 4 on Thursday.
Yes, big pick.
My goodness gracious.
But they moved it.
They say the draft starts at number 4. Gary, it's Dave, it's Jason. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I hope you guys are doing okay.
We're doing great. Hey, it's really for Kings fans a spot we're not used to being in the lottery, and here we go again. We're just trying to not do the Luka Doncic thing again, and it's to the point where our fan base, Gary, as you probably can guess, is so scarred.
No
that
faith.
Anyone we pick is certainly going to be a bust, and all the players we miss are going to be the next Luka or Steph Curry or Clay or Kawhi. So for you, do you agree with the idea that when people say the draft starts with Sacramento? I mean, does it?
I actually think the draft starts with Orlando.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, technically that's obviously true. But for these purposes, like, I'm not somebody who believes it's clear-cut that Jabari Smith or anybody else should go number 1. I think there's a real decision to be made there. Like, I would probably take a big swing on Chet Holmgren because I think the potential upside there is greater than anybody else's. Like, if he becomes what I envision him becoming, the best case scenario, I think he's the best player from this draft, but it's obviously risky, and there are people I respect, guys who are smarter, gals who are smarter than I, who would not touch him with the first pick. So, most mock drafts have Orlando taking Jabari Smith, and that might actually be the way it goes, but I'm not certain that it should be. The only thing I believe in is that the first 3 players off the board should probably be Chet Holmgren, Jabari Smith, Paolo Banchero, but you could literally put those guys in any order, and I could defend it.
How much of a gap then, Gary, if in your opinion is right, that's the top 3 and shuffle them around whatever way, to number 4, so that's the king. Like, how much is the gap to that next tier of players?
Not incredibly wide. I know these things might sound like they contradict each other. I don't think they do. The first 3 players off the board, in my opinion, should be Chet, Jabari, Paolo. But if you told me in 3 years Jaden Ivey was the best player from this draft, that's not hard for me to envision because a lot of the natural stuff that you look for in a possible superstar is already there. Shaedon Sharpe is another wild card. He was a number 1 ranked high school player in his class, but we haven't seen him play competitive basketball, in a long time and never at the collegiate level. So you're guessing a little more with him in terms of, what it looks like against top-tier competition. But if I'm Sacramento picking 4th, I mean, I'd obviously rather pick 3rd, 2nd, or 1st. But, you've got a shot to add a real superstar there. You just got to get the right guy. And then this is part of the draft process as well. You have to develop him correctly. I don't think it's an accident that Jordan Poole became a relevant and meaningful player throughout these NBA playoffs, despite being drafted at the end of the first round of his draft. Like, was Jordan Poole really one of the 10 best players from that draft? He looks like it right now, but would he even be what he is if he were with a different organization, not surrounded by Steph and Clay and Draymond and Steve Kerr? I think that's a reasonable point to make.
CBS Sports' Gary Parrish with us. Gary, like many, including 3 of the 4 on your group of mock drafts on CBS Sports, it seems like the air quotes consensus pick for the Kings has fallen to Jaden Ivey. And I noticed in your notes here, I'm going to read this. Can produce highlight plays on D when locked in, but far too often is uninterested, out of position, or not engaged enough to be a difference maker. And gee golly, if you had written that about De'Aaron Fox, I think a lot of people would have thought that fit as well. Is Jaden Ivey, in your opinion, the best player available, assuming the top 3, and I agree with you, stay in some order?
Yes. Now, it's not clear-cut. Like, if they were to go Keegan Murray or Shaedon Sharpe, I wouldn't be on television next Thursday night screaming, I can't believe what Sacramento did. I don't think it's a no-brainer that if those 3 guys are off the board, you have to take Jaden Ivey, but I would take Jaden Ivey. And the defensive issues, that's an accurate assessment of what he was at Purdue. His team was bad defensively, and he was bad defensively. Those 2 things were connected. But I tend to not be too concerned about 18, 19, 20-year-old defensive focus as long as they have the physical tools to be adequate, if not great. In other words, a slow-footed big man who can't guard in space, that's a real defensive issue that you have to take into account when you're evaluating prospects. It's why guys like Armando Bacot and Oscar Shibwe and Drew Timme and Trace Jackson Davis, it's largely why those guys are going back to school despite being great college players, because they have real physical limitations as it pertains to how basketball is played in the NBA right now. But Jaden Ivey has no physical limitations. He's got good size for his position, great body, and he's a top-shelf athlete. So there's no real reason he can't be a high-level defender, or at the very least an adequate defender. He just has to improve fundamentals and improve focus and make it a priority. So I tend not to be bothered by defensive issues when we're talking about athletes like Jaden Ivey.
So, Gary, if you're in the Kings front office, you're the decision maker of this. So you're Monte McNair, and to your point, you feel the three are going in whatever order. Jaden Ivey seems to be the name at 4 that you like, but people are calling. People are saying, hey, we want in at 4. What's the better strategy for Sacramento, knowing their roster construction, knowing what they've been, to entertain moving that pick, or to dive in and lock in at number 4?
Well, I think you should absolutely entertain. Take any phone call that comes, because you don't know what somebody is willing to offer. Like, how badly does somebody prioritize, whether it's Jaden Ivey or Shaden Sharp or some other prospect. So you're certainly keeping your phone turned on, and you're taking every phone call from every area code. And then it really just comes down to what is the offer. You know, like there are some things that you could tell me, like hypothetical trades, and this is a good time of the year for those as well. And I would say, no, you can't do that. And there's another one that you could tell me, and I'd say, yeah, you got to do that. So it comes down to, like, what is on the table. But and also, what is your priority? You know, there's some thought, and you guys would know this better than I. You talk about it every day, that, you know, Sacramento would prefer to add a piece that's a little older and can help right now because you want to try to push for the playoffs next season. There's some thought that maybe they'd rather do that than add a 19-year-old. And if that is your priority, then that's something that's got to be considered. But at this point, I would assume that unless somebody blows you out of the water with a proposition, you just sit there at 4, and if the first 3 guys come off the board in the order we think they're going to come off the board, then I would take Jaden Ivey. And I should say this, because when I first updated a mock and had Jaden Ivey going 4th to Sacramento after the lottery order was set, there was they already have De'Aaron Fox. And there's 2 things I would say about that. One is I almost never will let position, need, something I already have on my roster get in the way of taking best player available this high in a draft. There are certain spots where you might, but if I'm Sacramento, I wouldn't. Secondly, it's not entirely clear to me that Jaden Ivey's long-term position is point guard. He is called a point guard, and he does play point guard, but he is not the visionary, great passer, Ja Morant, LaMelo Ball type of point guard. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is he could play with De'Aaron Fox, no problem whatsoever. So even the positional fit that some people believe is there as a concern, it's not a concern to me.
So, Gary, follow up on that. If there's any way that those top 3 that you mentioned, one of them is available at 4, is it just a no-brainer for the Kings to take that player?
Yes. And in fact, that's why I think Houston is in a pretty easy spot, picking 3rd, because, Orlando's going to take somebody, Oklahoma City is going to take somebody, and then whichever of the top 3 is on the board, that I would just take the guy. So if it goes Paolo Jabari, I'd take Chet. If it goes Chet Jabari, I'd take Paolo. But if for some reason, and this could happen, like somebody out there might be, I have heard that there are franchises, I can't put a name on it, but there are franchises who would actually consider Jaden Ivey at number 1. And if you would consider Jaden Ivey at number 1, then you would obviously consider Jaden Ivey somewhere in the top 3. So if for whatever reason, one of those top 3 is available at 4, yes, for me it's a no-brainer. We're just taking that guy.
Gary Parrish, CBS Sports, joining us. Conventional wisdom around here is the Kings will keep the pick. Conventional wisdom also matches almost verbatim what you just said, that when you're drafting this high, especially for a team like the Kings that can't do free agency, that's where you're going to get a superstar. So fit will not be the number 1 thing. And we've really vacillated, Gary, between Jaden Ivey. And honestly, the first time I put out a prediction, it was Keegan Murray. And I still think it's almost certainly going to be one of those 2 players, barring something weird happening in the top 3. What are your thoughts on Keegan Murray? And are people overplaying the whole he's older, he's a nice player, but not really star potential? That seems to be the consensus.
Yeah, that you're right. That does seem to be the consensus. I'm not certain that's an accurate assessment. Like, listen, if you want to just, across the board say with literally every prospect in the lottery, I don't think they're going to be a star. You'll probably be right. Those guys do not become stars, even guys that are picked first, second, third, and fourth. So if your opinion is I don't think Keegan Murray will become a star, you'll probably be right because like most guys don't become stars. But I'm not ruling out anything for him. I mean, he is a 6'8", 6'9", switchable forward who can guard multiple positions and reliably make the three-point shot. Like, those guys are super valuable in the NBA today. Like, we used to call those guys role players. And I guess technically they are playing a role, but they those guys make $20 million a year now. They're important. And so I think his floor is that. And, we talk about this guy like he wasn't just a sophomore All-American. Like he was among the best scorers in the entire country, despite not having a lot of stuff like run for him. He just sort of scored in the flow of the game. And, he does have, some deficiency. Like, he's not a top-shelf athlete. If that bothers you, I understand. But I could see him being really good, and I wouldn't rule out star. And his age is something that will be used against him because he is 22. He's old. He's older. But I sometimes roll my eyes at this. I hear it all the time. Like, well, he's already 22. Like he's a finished project.
Right.
Like nobody's ever gotten better at basketball after the age of 22.
Right.
Ochai Agbaji from Kansas is going through this a little bit as well. And so. I live in Memphis, as I think you guys know, and a few years ago they drafted a 22-year-old named Desmond Bain, and now he looks like a borderline all-star. And a lot of the stuff you wanted to see, it was already there. Like, he was an incredible four-year player who shot it well from the perimeter. There's questions about his athleticism, questions about how much he could do bouncing the ball, questions about, wingspan. He's got short arms, but ultimately – he's a guy who has proven capable of creating a shot and making a shot. He's perfect next to John Morant, and he has gotten better after the age of 22, which, again, is a normal thing. And so, again, I would take Jaden Ivey at 4 if he's available. But if they went with Keegan Murray, and you said, here, give me 2 minutes defending the pick, it wouldn't be hard for me to do.
CBSSports.com's Gary Parrish. Gary, we appreciate your time. You said earlier if whoever they picked Ivy or Murray or whatever, you wouldn't go on TV and say, what the heck are the Kings doing? I can tell you this. If you go on TV next Thursday, no matter who they pick, and you say, what the heck are the Kings doing, you have a good shot at being right.
I know, and that's like another thing that's sort of connected to the franchise. Like, if you go there, the likelihood of you becoming what you should become decreases. And I guess it's a fair knock given the history, but, you can flip that stuff around. Buffalo in the NFL used to be a place where you couldn't possibly go there and be great, but you change, a few things in the front office and change your culture with a player or a person, and you can flip that around. In Memphis, it used to be a laughingstock. Now Memphis has one of the great young cores and front offices in the entire NBA. So, yes, those jokes will be made. Like, poor Jaden Ivey just got picked at Sacramento. His career is over. Like, people will make those jokes, but that's not something that can't. That's not something that's tied to a city or a franchise forever. And I would hope for Kings fans' sake that whoever you get, they become the star you want them to become.
You're awesome, Gary. We appreciate you, and we will continue to follow your mock draft all the way up till Thursday and throughout the year. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, guys. Anytime. Take care.
All right, you take care. That is Gary Parrish.
Good insight.
So